Hey everybody, Professor Snarch is checking in as we have completed Unit 1 in our online 1102 class, so we're into Unit 2 now. Just to go back to our due dates, so Unit 1 was due Thursday, August 25th. It's Friday right now when I'm recording this, and Unit 2 is due Monday, August 29th. So a fairly quick turnaround, although the workload is still pretty manageable as far as what you're responsible for in each of the units. And again, everything's kind of compressed because of our 8-week format as opposed to 16-week where you'd have like literally double the time. So we get into Unit 2, which actually is more of the kind of content of the course. So Unit 1 was just pretty simple introductions. You can check the gradebook to make sure you got full points if you completed the assignments on time and completely. And so we get into Unit 2, has us looking at a really quick thing on plagiarism. Honestly, it's pretty straightforward as far as everybody I think knows, at heart what plagiarism is. Clearly the policy here is just don't do it. It's an automatic F. You could get expelled from the school. It's just, bad news. But it's good to kind of lay that out early, and we really don't have to think about it, I hope, for the rest of the term. We also have a quick little section on literary analysis and literary terms. So as you may have gathered, our course is obviously focused on writing or composition, particularly developing an argument and supporting that with research. But the content then that we're the sort of focus for what we're writing about is the literature from our Norton textbook. So literature is sort of an overly fancy word for some people. Just the short stories and plays that we're reading for the class. So it doesn't need to be kind of highbrow and fancy and inaccessible all of a sudden. But it is good to have a kind of basis for common terms that we might use when we're doing literary analysis. And again, there's lots of really fancy sort of technical jargon that we don't need to worry about. We're really just talking about simple terms that people probably already know, setting, character, plot, things like narrative, protagonist, antagonist. Just basic stuff like that, symbolism and imagery, words that allow you to express in a little more concise way than might otherwise be the case the kinds of arguments you want to be putting forward in the sorts of essays that we're writing for this term, or for this course. So especially if you haven't written this kind of essay before, or it's been a while since you have, I really would encourage you to look through our textbook for some good examples. They're really throughout. There's examples in our course. There's a sample essays link that you can look at. And none of the examples are necessarily perfect, like if you just duplicate that, and obviously you can't copy it. But they do suggest the kind of tone and approach and scope and type of argument that we're constructing for the essays that we're writing for this class. But again, Unit 2 really just gets the ball rolling as far as getting into that. And ultimately the point is to really learn about the writing process or the component pieces of an argumentative paper or an analysis paper or research paper, whatever you want to call it. And it's less about you discovering some profound meaning in a short story or a play that we read. It's important that you identify major themes and that kind of thing, and how the author sort of develops or communicates those themes. But what we're finally concerned with is your ability to express that argument and idea in a solid research paper. So, and that's really what Unit 2 is just getting us started with. And we'll sort of build on that as we go through the next few units, Unit 3 and 4. And then we really don't get to our first major essay until Unit 7, which is fairly well into the game. So you really want to think about these units as kind of skills units, right? They're developing certain kind of pieces that we'll then bring all together when we're finally doing that larger essay. And in fact, despite the fact that 1102 is the research course, we don't actually get into using secondary sources within an essay until Unit 8, which is sort of a revision of the first essay that you've done. We do begin to work with secondary sources a little bit earlier than that, but they're not built into an essay until almost halfway through the course. So again, think of these earlier units as just sort of building the skills that you'll want to put into place when we actually get to those major writing assignments. So related to that then, and I'll say this a number of times, it's throughout the course, it's maybe the most important piece of information I can give you, sort of heads up early on. Because 1102, English 1102 is sort of the research class, we focus really heavily, and your grade really depends more so than if this were an 1101 or another kind of writing class. Your grade really depends on your ability to follow the models and the examples that are in the course, and then show me in the writing that you're doing that you can differentiate between primary and secondary sources. And again, even if you don't know that right now, that's exactly what we'll be learning as the course goes on. So there's primary, secondary sources. You need to integrate those sources, whether they're primary or secondary, smoothly into your essays. So again, that's a skill that we practice and that you need to show me you've learned in your essays. You need to be able to cite correctly following MLA guidelines within the paper, within the essays that you're writing, and then you need to be able to put together a correctly formatted works cited page. You need to also be able to use, find and use appropriate secondary sources, so ones from databases, and secondary sources that are direct discussions of the primary texts that you're writing about. And like I said, I'll elaborate on all of these points as we kind of come up to them in and throughout the course. So this isn't the only time I'll mention it. But an example of an appropriate source is if you're writing an essay about, a particular theme in A Rose for Emily or flight patterns, or one of the stories that we've read for class, your secondary source, if you're required to use one, has to be a direct discussion of that short story. So it's not just a kind of related text that is sort of connected to an idea that also happens to show up in the primary text that you're talking about. What you really want to imagine is that your research paper, when you finally do write them, is your ability to kind of enter into a dialogue that's ongoing or already ongoing about the particular primary text that you've chosen to write about. So if you include, like, let's skip to the very final essay where you have multiple secondary sources, you want to imagine that your voice is talking about Death of a Salesman, let's say, as the primary text, and you've gathered these other voices that are also talking about Death of a Salesman. So you haven't just gathered these secondary sources that are about how to sell anything to anyone, or just sort of vaguely related ideas. That's an inappropriate source. So part of what you need to show me when it's all said and done, in addition to that you understand primary versus secondary, you can cite in-text citation correctly, you can integrate quotations smoothly into your papers, you can construct a works cited page correctly. In addition to all of that, you need to, of course, show me that you can find and use appropriate secondary sources. And like I said, this is sort of the whole package all at once that I'm presenting to you, but it's really broken out throughout the course in terms of individual skills that we can, sort of learn about, practice a little bit for fairly low or no point value, so you get the opportunity to sort of practice it first. And then you want to really think about those essays as your opportunity where the points really matter to show me that you have gotten all those concepts from class. And like I said, there's lots of examples to follow and models and opportunities to sort of test things out before it's high stakes when it's the major essays, particularly that final essay. And if you haven't looked, the final essay is worth almost half of the entire course grade. So that's a lot of pressure on that final assignment. And there's probably, you may feel negative about that, but I would encourage you to actually use that to your advantage, because again, if you really focus and pay attention throughout the course, that final paper is nothing that we haven't done before. So you actually have the opportunity to get things right or wrong, learn from that, and what you're doing is out of 10 points or 15 points or even 50, which is not very much, given that the course is out of 1,000. So you can really use that big point value final essay to your advantage because it's just showing all of the stuff that you've had the opportunity to work through already. So it's not like big points, but you're being tested on stuff that you haven't done before, or you're just going to find out the hard way is, am I doing this right or am I doing it wrong? You've had the opportunity throughout the course prior to that to do it right or wrong, and obviously if you do it wrong, you get feedback and you can make the correction for that final essay, which is where it really matters. Okay, so that, again, that's a lot of sort of big picture stuff for the course, but you'll see that as we work through the units, it's really kind of broken down into much more particular and individual sorts of skills that we're practicing and much smaller assignments before we get into those larger writing assignments. Part of what I'll remind you then to conclude is that you know, given the nature of our course as far as, you know, it's online, it's 8 weeks, we don't have that face-to-face, to really be in touch with me sort of ASAP if you have outright questions or just concerns, even if you're sort of 99% sure that you're doing things right, make it 100, you know, get in touch with me and make sure. One of the things that I've found as a professor is that, especially of writing, is that successful writing often comes out, maybe even almost always comes out, of students being confident in what they're doing. So the writing is just better. It's more concise, it's more direct, it's more precise, it's more kind of correct in terms of its use of sources and formatting, just all of that stuff. When the student, the writer, is confident about what he or she is doing. And 99% sure is pretty confident, but 100% sure is even more confident. So better to be 100%. So like I said, if you have any questions about, you know, stuff that we're working through or kind of big picture things, don't hesitate to be in touch with me. Okay, so it's on to Unit 2, and I'll be back in touch with everybody within a few days.